welcome Sawyer to the Chisholm Report. Sawyer is the co-founder and president of High Tide Daily. Is there anything you'd like to say about yourself?
Thank you for having me. I also run a small scale podcast. I'm excited to be on. My account is the High Tide Daily.
That's very cool.
Thank you.
And I do enjoy your podcast. I've checked out your podcast. I have the first question. So you and I, we agree on a lot. Because we both lean pretty libertarian. But like 2 weeks ago, I posted a post about conversion therapy that you made a comment on. And I don't know like how, like to the extent you're educated on what conversion therapy is exactly, but your comment said that you needed to see some form of harm enough for the government to be allowed to interfere with a parent's parenting their children. So I'd like to ask, how much do you know about LGBT conversion therapy?
I'm going to have to work on the semantic side of that in terms of what would you define conversion therapy?
Well, conversion therapy is considered consulting either a psychologist, a priest, so religious leader, in attempting to change a person's sexual orientation.
Okay. Well, so let me give a little bit of a prerequisite right here. I believe that we need to start off with what homosexuality is. I believe that what Freud says about sexuality and the theory of sexuality, which is sexuality is a path that you can take, and there isn't necessarily a wrong path. It turns into an environmental factor that we all kind of walk into as we walk through the paths of life, and it's irreversible what sexuality you are. And so in terms of conversion therapy, though, however, I think with families, there needs to be a certain amount of cognitive or physical distress from a child in order to intervene as the government, because I'm always going to lean pro non-intervention as a libertarian, somewhat as a paleo-con, rather than working on erring on the other side of that, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. So what if I presented to you the fact that minors who have gone to conversion therapy were 5 times more likely to commit suicide?
Okay, like I said, in terms of defining conversion therapy, if it puts them in cognitive or physical distress, then the government does need to intervene.
Certain types of conversion therapy are fine and other types are not, is what you're trying to say almost, sort of?
Well, what I'm trying to say is conversion therapy is wrong because it doesn't work. Because once you get to a certain age as a human being, you're not going to change your sexuality. That's not something that you can just flip like a switch. And that's what Freud wrote. I do think, however, people have the right to be wrong as long as it's non-harmful to other human beings to an exponential amount, such as somebody raising their child.
When you are a child, you are not really able to make decisions on yourself, and almost always it's been shown that conversion therapy does have a harmful effect on the children, making them 5 times more likely to commit suicide, even if it's like, just seeing a therapist or, shock therapy. All of that still has, while it's range, some sort of negative, harmful effect. If this was someone who was a grown adult making that decision for themselves, then that would be different. However, when it's the parent making the decision for the child, don't you think that there is some sort of abusive argument, and it almost always does have a negative effect?
I agree with you, and that's where I tend to be against the electrotherapy, because like I said, it does not work, because you can't just flip a switch and then be the opposite sexuality. That's not how we're built neurologically. And so I do think, though, if you go to a camp where they don't physically or cognitively hurt you in any way, the parent should be allowed to do that as long as they are a minor and the parents are consenting. Do you disagree with that?
I somewhat do, because while I agree that going to a camp where you're trying to be conditioned in a way is less harmful than having, actual pain being inflicted, there is still some sort of mental trauma of being consistently told that who you are is wrong, and trying to recondition your brain in a way that has been scientifically proven to not work. And usually, whether it is, just a camp, going to a camp, or seeing a therapist, or shock therapy, all of those, while there is a range, it does have some sort of negative, harmful effects most of the time.
If I could just jump in, it's almost like I personally at least would consider it a form of verbal abuse, because you're not physically being hurt, but you're being mentally manipulated in a way that does cause harm to you, which is hence the 5 times more likely to commit suicide.
If you don't mind me asking, are you willing to broaden this standard with other forms of scaring kids straight, whether it be putting them into a position where they're shown people that have been doing something that they disagree with? Like, I'm not saying that being gay is wrong. I'm definitely not saying that. Do what you want. I don't care what you're doing with your genitalia. But in terms of parents sending their kids to a place, do you think sending kids to a church camp where they're told to stop lying and cheating and stealing is wrong? Because that would be them still under the same structural idea.
Well, teaching a kid to like not lie, steal. I mean, even you said like sexuality isn't reversible, right? It's irreversible.
Yeah.
So, do you think stuff like stealing do you think that's not reversible? Or?
Well, I don't see the relevance here, because the point I'm trying to make is with this, what you're saying is it's verbal abuse for you to tell somebody to do something to not do something that is within your religion, that your religion teaches you not to, whether it be sexuality or lying. And again, I need to emphasize that I'm completely fine with anybody doing what they want with their genitalia, because I don't want this to be a huge misconception.
Like, of course, you're not homophobic. Like, we know you don't hate people. But
I think that like whether or not it's reversible or not is really important, because like to tell someone not to lie, like that's something you can easily do. Sexuality isn't something you can change.
I think you're correct there, but I don't think that has anything to do with the situations being analogous.
For someone changing something that is it's just not going to change. And when you're trying to make someone change something about themselves that they literally can't change, it's a lot of pressure, and it's almost like bullying. You're bullying a child to change something about themselves that they can't. So it would be like bullying a child because they have blue eyes, or bullying a child because they have blonde hair. And they can't really, I mean, you could dye your hair, but like that's besides the point. Like, you can't really physically change that.
So reprimanding a child comes down to reversibility.
Won't work, and it also has demonstrated harm. So there's no benefit out of it at all, and there is tons of psychological harm.
And may I add, if there was a way for someone to consensually say, I do not like this, I want to change it on my own terms and convert in a way that is healthy and somewhat effective, then I think most of us will be like, do what you want, except for, a couple of people. There are no effective ways to do it in a way that someone comes out healthier in the end, or in any sort of healthy way to do it. So if it's ineffective, almost always unhealthy, then isn't it in a way abusive to force a child who is not willing to consent to do this and to do something that is psychologically harmful 99% of the time and almost always ineffective?
It comes down to layers again, because what we see a lot of the times with the scared straight, like I brought up that analogy because in some ways I think it's comparable, because I do think that there is psychological distress that comes out of that, being sent to a prison and having prisoners yell slurs at you and yell just horrible words at you. And so I think we need to talk more about, rather than does it work, and more so is this abuse, is this child abuse?
So just to kind of piggyback on this kind of idea, do you think that parents should have the right to be able to send their children to these places, even if they aren't like quote unquote abusive?
It has to get into the semantics of that as well, because if it's just a camp where they're getting lectured on their sexuality, I think that parents should be allowed to do that, because even if it is wrong, and I stand with you guys in saying that's wrong, you can't reverse sexuality, I do think that they should have the right to do that, because people should have the right to be wrong in a lot of circumstances.
Sawyer, who do you plan on voting for in the next upcoming election? do you plan on voting third party, or do you plan on voting for Donald Trump? Do you plan on voting for Joe Biden? And why do you plan on voting for that person?
Really interesting question, and I've been excited to answer this all week because there hasn't been one solid answer that I've just stuck with the entire campaigning of every candidate. I was with Kanye for a while, believe it or not. I was flirting with the idea of Joe. I was flirting with the idea of Biden. And I'll tell you why I was thinking Biden. Because if Trump gets elected this year, then in 2024 there will certainly be a Democrat elected, and they'll more than likely be more liberal than Joe Biden. I think they might even be more liberal than Kamala Harris, and at least in some aspects. And so I was flirting with the idea of voting for Joe to try and get him in, so that we could possibly get a Republican in 2024 and fix some of the problems that I have with Trump and Biden. That somebody that would be more suitable to kind of follow the conservative mission, because if that makes sense, because Trump kind of is chasing after his own mythos that the conservatives aren't really that doesn't line up with us conservatives. I mean, I've kind of floated towards the idea of being a paleo-con, and I don't really think that Trump's beliefs line up with that, if that makes sense. Right now, as of now, I think I'm leaning towards Trump. Just because I'm scared. I'm scared of having Kamala as president because I don't think she's suited to be president, and I think she's manipulative. I think that she's crossed a line, and I think they've all crossed a line, but I'd be more scared to have her in office rather than the others.
So you would be more scared to have Kamala Harris in office rather than to have Trump in office?
Right now, you're thinking like Trump, sort of right now?
What are some like specific reasons you don't like Kamala?
I think as president and as a person, Trump has crossed lines that he shouldn't have. He's not suited to be president, and that he's just gone to a point that a president shouldn't go. I think Hillary did the same thing. I think Joe Biden has done the same thing, and I think Kamala Harris has done the same thing. And now what more I'm worried about is Kamala Harris is worried about her agenda rather than what benefits Americans. And I know Donald Trump is too in a lot of aspects. A lot of what he's done for the economy has just benefited his businesses by him taking away the big gov economy. It's helped him as much as anybody else, and I see that. But I think his policy is a lot more American friendly, whether it be universal health care or whether it be the 1,500 people that Kamala locked up under marijuana charges. I also think that Kamala doesn't value life, which is really important to me. I think we saw that when she withheld evidence. She's willing to let people die for her own gain to benefit her record as a prosecutor. And I think that's really telling. I think that there is a lot of knocks on Donald Trump. He drives me crazy daily. I remember being to the point where I wanted to cry when he did what he did to the Kurds, just because I was so upset and distraught from his decision. I remember being upset on what he said about the Buffalo man, the man that was pushed to the ground by police officers. I remember being distraught about that. But I do think that Kamala is at a point beyond Donald Trump, and that the policy is much more suitable to me, and Donald Trump's policy is much better for me than Kamala's.
The impeachment of Donald Trump, or would you support him being impeached in the future?
It depends. I don't necessarily want to see, well, he's already been impeached, but him being dismissed from office. I don't really want to see Mike Pence take his position. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that, but I think I'd rather have Trump than Pence.
I'd have to agree.
Is there a reason exactly why you'd prefer Donald Trump over Mike Pence becoming the next president if he were to get impeached and removed?
I think a lot of it is intellectual capacity. I don't really have many reasons to hate Mike Pence, but I think he's just not suited for the job. I think he fits his role, which is to go around and speak at smaller colleges and to make statements rather than lead a country.
And do you believe that Donald Trump has a greater mental capacity than Mike Pence?
I think Donald Trump is smarter than Mike Pence, yes.
I agree in terms of intelligence, but when it comes to leading a country, that's where I personally disagree, because I think Pence would be better at governing, but I think Donald Trump is smarter, if that makes sense. But that's just my personal belief.
Yeah, I think that's valid.
So just kind of piggybacking off of this idea of, certain people being unfit to lead the country, who do you personally think would be fit to run the country?
That's a hard question, and the easy answer is no one has been except Reagan, but I won't leave you guys with that because I do think that there are people suited to lead the country. I think Rand Paul is a good example because Rand Paul doesn't put up with the GOP when they're saying crazy stuff. Rand Paul was the one that was pushing for the Breonna Taylor bill. Rand Paul was the one that was pushing for Americans rather than his own party, and we don't see that a lot today with the GOP. I remember when Obama was in office, he was told by some Republican congressmen that they were just going to tear down every idea that he had, and they were going to make his term as inconsequential as possible. I think we see that a lot with both parties, and I think that's why we need people that are willing to be nonpartisan, even though they belong to a party.
I agree. I like Rand Paul a lot. I think that he's very good because he doesn't just go along with everything the GOP does. And often he takes stands that are very controversial, and then he gets hit very hard by the media for standing up for what he believes is right and going against literally everyone else in Congress.
Yeah, there's a level of respectability that I want that Donald Trump does not possess. We need a president that just doesn't say everything that comes to their mind, that doesn't get told by their administration to not hold press briefings just because of the dumpster fire that they are.
Can you remind me what state you're in, if you're comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, sure. I'm currently in West Virginia.
Okay, and so out of the 4 candidates, regardless of the political decision that voting for one of them would make, what candidate resonates the most with you? You said that you leaned very libertarian or paleo-conservative, but do you resonate with Joe Jorgensen?
Not necessarily because of immigration policy and a couple of other things. I haven't really enjoyed her policy of immigration. I'm very, very pro closed borders, which is one of the least libertarian things about me. She also has some interesting other policies. I'm getting farther and farther away from libertarianism, even though I am like a classical liberal at heart. I'm against complete anarchy, or like I know that Joe isn't for complete anarchy, but I'm a little more pro government than she is.
Okay, so who out of the 4 candidates, the 4 main candidates, who resonates with you the most, like on a ideological level?
Based off of public views, it would be Trump, even though he probably doesn't believe what his public views are. And I think we've seen that time and time again.
My question is, where did you get your beliefs from? What personal experiences have you had that have affected your beliefs? Do you have a story behind it? That'd be great.
I don't know if I can point to one big anecdote that has kind of converted me into being a paleocon. I've grown up in a huge neocon area of people that are going to have the willingness to agree with whatever Republican politician is in office. And I've kind of always hated that. I've gone against the grain and been a contrarian with a lot of routes, but I've still always had somewhat the conservative belief system. And so for me to kind of just be pointed in the area of supporting conservatism, but not the people, has kind of just been, in a way, somewhat Politigram, and then my own readings, because you hear a lot of interesting opinions on Politigram, and even though it does more harm than good, you do get to reinforce your beliefs by hearing things and then going to read about.
So with the current climate, Black Lives Matter is a huge trending thing. So I guess I'd like to ask some of your thoughts on how it's all gone. Do you agree with the general movement or the organization, maybe both, with Black Lives Matter? What are your thoughts?
This is a hard question because I have to walk a thin line here, or I can get in trouble by both sides. My opinion on it hasn't been the same thing. Black lives, of course, matter, and I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to say that we need to focus on Black lives right now rather than saying white lives matter or straight lives matter or police lives matter, because right now the individual issue we're talking about is Black lives, and so it's a red herring to talk about anything else. What my feelings on the movement, though, is pretty objective, which is they are neo-Marxists that want to destroy the nuclear family, which I will always have an inherent problem with, because one of the biggest it would be cognitive dissonance for me to support an organization fully that is a neo-Marxist organization, just because I've always been on the opposite side of communism, whether it be something like this. I do think that they are doing things the wrong way too. I think pigs in a blanket frying like bacon is never going to get you the results that you want. I think violence is never going to be the answer. And I think we saw that with a lot of the founders revolting. Now, in terms of systemic issues, my thoughts on that and whether or not there is, because that ties into the Black Lives Matter movement. I think there are issues. I don't know if it's necessarily systemic. I think there are issues within the police organization. I think if you're a black male, a black man, or a black person, you're 20 times more likely to get pulled over by the police, and which that number actually substantially goes down in the nighttime just because you can't see people's skin tone. And so I think we need to address stuff like that. And I would rather see a fix the police movement and Black Lives Matter movement rather than the organization of Black Lives Matter and defund the police, because I think we need better cognitive training and better physical training with the police. And I think that would benefit Black people the most out of anyone. If we could fix the training, fix the professionals that are meant to protect us, and then allow them to go into areas that need it the most. I think that is what is going to help us the most. I don't think defunding the police or taking police out of areas is ever going to help anybody. I think that in fact hurts Black people the most.
Do you have any like specific ideas for like reforms that could be passed and put into place that would help reform police, reform the criminal justice system, and all those sort of things?
Me, it just comes down to training mostly. Because with a lot of them, if you look at the physical and cognitive requirements, you can be a superstar, and I mean a superstar physically in the police force, and might not get into the military. That's how big of a differentiation there is between the requirements. I think that we need to somewhat mimic training like the military, because I think they've been successful in that. We don't see as many military scandals as we do police scandals. I think to help Black citizens and to help them from the police oppression that does occur, we need to, one, do that, and then also we need to get those good police officers and we need to put them in crime-ridden areas, because then I think that Black people will benefit from that the most.
Is it possible for you to elaborate on Black Lives Matter wanting to destroy the family unit?
Yeah, so in their mission statement, they say they want to destroy the nuclear family, which sounds unrelated or almost unreasonable to a movement about preserving African-American lives.
I agree. I feel like a position like that wouldn't help them. If anything, I think it would make things worse for their own community.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I personally like the movement of Black Lives Matter, but the organization, I could never like get on board with the organization. I would never donate to the organization. They have other motives that I do not agree with at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I also think the All Cops Are Bastards movement is even worse than the organization of Black Lives Matter. I think to say that, to make a statement that large is foolish even.
May I actually insert my opinion? When we, coming from a progressive who has been like on hinge about ACAB, when people say all cops are bastards, that does not mean that all cops are bastards as in bad people. That means that the police system is bastardized or not as good or not as well-intentioned as it originally is. So to say all cops are bastards means people willingly partake in a bastardized system. So that's more talking about the system that people willingly take place in, rather than saying that all cops are bad people.
I do think it's important to note, however, what you said about all cops, about for them to be willing to partake in something in a system like this, they have to be, I don't know if you said they have to be bad, but for them to be willing to partake. I've heard that opinion as well, that you're bad if you're willing to join the police force, which I don't think is the case, because if you look at the mission statement of the police, it's to protect Americans. And so to join a force like that, you should want to change it, not dismantle it and throw it out. I think that we should push towards having better people join the police force rather than saying, if you join, you're bad. Because what that can do on the psyche is it's going to be polarizing, frankly. It's going to polarize and push the person away and push them away from the entire movement and blind them from what is trying to be accomplished.
Yeah, and like I said again, we're not saying that people who join it are bad people. We're just saying that it is generally a fact that you're taking part in a bastardized system. That sorry, let me finish. That does not bastardized means not as pure or well intentioned as it used to be. Now that can still mean that you want to change it, but does mean that the system that you partake in is bastardized, whether your intentions or not. Does not mean that you're a bad person.
I hope that that is the intention of most B people, because empirically I have seen quite a few of them think that if you're a cop then you're bad, and I regretfully see that, and it honestly makes me sad that people just hold that opinion where they're willing to classify somebody so easily based off of vocation.
I actually strongly agree with this, because I would rather spend most of my time critiquing the way the system works rather than just making a statement about all costs, because while it's true you do partake in a bastardized system, I think like we can just critique the system, and I think there are many cops that want to change the system from within.
We're glad you're back. We thought you left us for a second.
I got kicked off. Yeah, so I wanted to make is, I think you can also not support a lot of the wrongful, a lot of the wrong police officers, the bad police officers, but also see that the police force has done good. If you look at the defunding of the police in New York, shootings shot up 177% and murder shot up 59%, showing that the police do have an area that they are meant to do. The police are a necessity, rather, and that we do need them in some route of life. We just need better ones a lot of the time.
While yes, after the police have been defunded, crime in New York has been raised. Also, crime has kind of been rising in most cities across America, including Republican ones, or including cities that haven't really defunded the police yet. That's kind of been a national thing. However, Camden actually, I'm not saying that we should defund or abolish. Also, I just want to put something out for the people in the audience. There's a huge difference between defunding and abolishing. Defunding means redirecting some of the funds that go to the police to preventing poverty, which in turn prevents crime. So it's more about preventing crime through social programs, and abolishing just means get rid. So there's a huge difference over there. However, I will say that in the city of Camden, New Jersey, I believe they essentially abolished or greatly defunded the police, and they did see a downtick of crime. I'm not too well versed on everything, but I don't necessarily buy the idea that there is a direct correlation. There may be, but we haven't seen in every single case of defunding the police, crime has skyrocketed, or every single case of defunding the police it has greatly dropped. So, also another thing is defunding the police is supposed to help prevent crime over time. So it may be an immediate thing. Again, I am not an expert.
I can say that, yes, Camden did basically essentially dismantle their police force and rebuild it back up. And since then, crime has decreased. And Camden, the police force used to be a complete and total mess. And now you saw this year, the Camden police force was, instead of being a complete and total mess and riots in Camden, they were actually marching with the protesters this year after the dismantling of the police and the rebuilding back up.
I do think we need to address the immediate statistics of New York, though, because it was kind of downplayed how drastically upwards it fluctuated right when it was defunded. Because, I mean, of course, crime rates have been going up since the last 6 months or even a year because of the climate that we see right now. But in terms of Blasio defunding the police in July and then it shooting up 177% and murder shooting up 59%. I don't think that you can diagnose that with anything else rather than them taking $1 billion from the police force.
Well, if you look at there's been like riots in every city across the nation. We've been seeing this. So crime has been going up in every city. It's been going up in Chicago. It's been going up in Portland. It's been going up in every city, every major city, Baltimore, just every city because of these riots. So I don't think that you can really make the connection between defunding the police and crime going up in this very moment because of all these riots. It's very hard to actually do that.
If you look at what is actually fully happening, which is in July, de Blasio took away $1 billion, and then immediately it shot up. Portland, Chicago, and other places didn't just shoot up like that at certain times. At least not right. The police were defunded. I think to see immediate results like that, it's hard to say it's anything rather than defunding the police.
So in your opinion, at what point do you think the protests will stop? Like, do you think it's going to take the government to give them what they want? Or do you think it's just like a trend and then it'll fade away? Or once the election is over, like, what's your prediction?
I've thought long and hard about this, and I haven't came to just one prediction. I really want to say it'll be over in November, but I'm not quite sure that's the case. It may just be about getting Trump out of office, or at least that may be why the swamp is allowing protests to happen and riots to happen. But who knows? We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a follow-up question. Would you say that these riots and protests are helping Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Because I could honestly see it go both ways, but I would like to know your opinion.
That's honestly hard because we've seen such a huge fluctuation between the polls. Because as of recent, Trump has shot up. I don't know if that's somewhat because of rioting and Americans are kind of just done with the Black Lives Matter movement, because we definitely are seeing that, especially with Zoomers. So many Zoomers have just disregarded the Black Lives movement in its entirety. Maybe it will benefit Trump in the long run. I understand the logic of saying that it might benefit Joe Biden because it shows that Trump doesn't have control of the country, but who knows?
I was talking to Next Gen and Isabella about this, and we said that the small business owners that have been impacted by the protests and riots, they are the people that are more likely to vote in an election than the people that are around our ages.
I'd be inclined to agree.
I feel like this is kind of irrelevant at this point, but I was going to say, when we were talking about murders striking out, I was going to say that overall, crime as a whole, I think decreased like 5%, but murders and but those two specific crimes shot up, so I'm not sure if that's still relevant. That's what I was going to say. In New York, I think crime or violent crime as a whole went down. In New York City, after defunding the police, crime as a whole went down, but murders and burglaries were the other one that you were saying shot up. But yeah, there was a slight decrease in overall crime, but those two crimes had a big spike. So much.
Well, I said murders and shootings shot up. I don't think crime went down. I'm not so sure about that. I can source you to is the Wall Street Journal article that they wrote about it. I haven't really seen any crime that has gone down in New York. You can show me if I'm wrong though. Homicides are also up 24% this year.
Our goal for this podcast is to have open discourse and get opinions from all sides of the political spectrum. I was wondering if you could tell us a few misconceptions people have about paleocons, because from my understanding, there's this misconception, or I don't know if it's true, but a lot of people say, oh, paleocons are racist towards minorities. And I want to hear your input on it because I'm sure you get it a lot.
Yeah, it's almost hard to call yourself a paleocon today because you get called alt-right or fascist or a racist homophobe that just hates America and is a bigot. I don't think that's true. I think with paleocons, a lot of them are sensible people that just want to get back to our conservative roots, because what conservatism has become today scares me because I don't think it represents what being conservative is and what conservative values are. And so for the media to kind of just portray us as the racist ones that just don't want change, it doesn't really make sense to me. And like you said, it's a huge misconception that we see daily.
Also, just a follow-up question. Would Tucker Carlson be considered a paleocon? Because I kind of don't have an idea of an example of one of them.
I would be inclined to say he is, in terms of policy at least. I don't know what he calls himself because Yeah, he's for qualified immunity, but he's for a lot of other paleocon ideas that would make sense. He's definitely not a neocon in terms of like the Ben Shapiro Crowder that we see.
I had a question because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going into college now, right? Or you will be eventually going into college?
I won't announce the timeline, but pretty much.
Okay. So what are you studying? Are you studying like political science or government, or are you not interested in going into that for a degree? And if you are studying something related to politics, what do you want to do with that degree? And of course, if you don't want to answer the question, you don't have to.
Awesome question. So I'm right now juggling between the ideas of either getting a BA in government or majoring in psychology and then working towards a doctorate in that. My father actually had a major in political science, and he was working amongst the number 2 man in China. And so that's kind of always been an idea that I've had, where I want to work with embassies and do embassy work. But right now I'm unsure if I'd rather do that or become a clinical psychoanalyst.
So in regards to if you were to get a political science or related degree, you would want to go into like international politics and work with embassies?
Yeah, the odds are is that would be what would happen for me.
Since we're talking about college right now, what is your opinion on college tuition? Do you think it's really expensive? Should students have their student loans removed? There are so many ideas. Or do you think people should like enlist in the military and apply for the GI Bill? Or what would you recommend, and what's your opinion?
So for a college student, I don't really have much to recommend to them. I do see a solution though, which is the Andrew Yang solution, not UBI, obviously, but what he has proposed about fixing college prices, which is going to the colleges that the government funds and saying, we're going to take away your funding unless you take down prices. I think that could pretty much work, because they haven't just monopolized, they've taken over more than they should have. They've profited more than they should have, and which isn't necessarily their fault, but they're getting loads of money, and it's not going back to anybody else. And so I don't think it's necessarily against a capitalistic mindset to say we're going to take away your funding if you don't take down prices, since the government is paying in the first place.
Andrew Yang were to be like the Democratic presidential nominee right now instead of Joe Biden, would you consider voting for him, or would you still have settled for someone else?
I would be more apt than to vote for a pair of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. My original Democratic candidate that I was rooting for was Tulsi Gabbard. I wanted her in the most, and I may have even voted for her over Trump without looking back.
Thank you so much for everyone for watching this episode of the Chisholm Report with Sawyer.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My Instagram is just my name, no caps or spaces. If you have a problem with anything I said, DM me. I'm more than willing to have a civil conversation. That's what we need right now. We need the unity of having a conversation. And so feel free to text me and to tell me your issues with what I said. My business right now, my business startup is High Tide Daily with no caps or spaces, HIGHTIDEDAILY, High Tide Daily on Instagram.
Hey man, watch where you going. Oh, my bad, kid. I was just